I'm getting kind of sick of the committee, the College Football Playoff Committee, just not taking every factor into account. So, I tried to do that, and I made my own rankings, and I'm going to show you that, but let's talk about it a little bit first. Ryan Curley from Dawg Post here, talking about the College Football Playoff Committee. So, watching the rankings show on Tuesday, and it comes out, and again, I think that the SEC schools were a little disrespected. Call it SEC bias. It is a little bit SEC bias, right? I cover an SEC team. I grew up in an SEC team world. But look, guys, I mean, the strength of schedule is just being completely ignored in these conversations. It has to be. Otherwise, and the strength of record certainly is being ignored if you ask me. If you take every bit of criteria into account, which was supposed to be the whole point of the College Football Playoff Committee, I just don't understand how you could come up with the list that they came up with. You know what I mean? Like, I don't understand how you could come up with the rankings that they have. When you look at this and you watch all these games and you see how these teams are playing against other teams, are they just looking at the win and the loss column? That's something that Kirby Smart has talked about. Is that all that's going on? I don't think so. I think to an extent they are, but I'm going to go through the College Football Playoff rankings and kind of just explain to you the inconsistencies about it, and then I know, and look, no ranking is going to be perfect. There's people that are going to look at mine and they're like, are you freaking kidding me? They're gonna call me a moron because, you know, that's how the cycle of these things work, and people are going to be like, are you serious? Like, that's actually your opinion? So I'm going to show you what I think after I go through the rankings and just kind of explain to you why I don't understand. I just, it's really hard for me to fathom. Right, I'll pull it up here in just a second, and we'll go through this. Just give me a moment. All right, college football rankings. Ooh, there we go. Here's some of the inconsistencies, okay? Miami, to me, Texas, Penn State. Kind of in a similar boat, right? Where they have big losses. Texas and Penn State are two teams that are better than the team that Miami lost to, obviously Georgia Tech. But then you look at the wins, and what is Texas's best win? Is it the big win over Florida? Is it the 10-point win at Arkansas? So to me, Texas, Indiana, Penn State, Miami, all in a similar boat where they don't have that huge win. Now, how do you rank them when other teams have these two losses? I get it. But here's another inconsistency. BYU beat SMU. And I thought that the heads-to-heads matter because they matter over here, but it doesn't seem like it matters right here. It also seems like it doesn't matter over here, where South Carolina beat Texas A&M. Let's not forget the fact that Missouri lost last week and did not move in the rankings. So just pointing out to you a few of the things that truly don't make any sense to me when looking at these rankings. Penn State, why is Penn State ranked ahead of Indiana? To me, that doesn't logically make sense either. If they feel so highly about Indiana, why is Indiana ranked behind Penn State when Penn State has a loss? And when you look at the rest of it, it's kind of similar, right? Penn State doesn't have some marquee win. Their best win is over Illinois. I think the final score to that, if I remember correctly, was 21-7, something like that. It was roughly a 2-3 touchdown win over Illinois. And Illinois just got ranked again this week. They haven't been in the rankings. Indiana obviously doesn't have a win over these ranked opponents. So to me, I just think there are a lot of inconsistencies. Why did Alabama jump 3 spots and jump Miami? But why did Ole Miss and Georgia only jump 2 spots? It's just, to me, you can't justify a lot of this stuff. It doesn't make total sense. So I think there's a lot of inconsistencies. These SEC schools are really good, right? Now, there's some bias in that. And I think that it's obvious, though, when you're watching a game from the SEC and you're watching a game from like the ACC or pretty much any other conference, guys. If I'm being quite frank, it's just not really the same product. It's not. I watched Clemson and Pittsburgh last week, and oh my goodness, was that a bad display of football. And it just was rough. And those last few minutes, the tackling was bad, the blocking was bad all over the place. The play calling was bizarre. It just wasn't great. And that happens in the SEC sometimes. I'm not saying it doesn't, but you go and watch these conferences and you see the difference in the talent on the outside and the talent up front. It's not the same thing. I took a crack at trying to rank the top 12. So I'm going to let you look at that. Get mad if you want to get mad. But I understand where the committee's coming from in this part, and I will defend the committee in this one part. This was near impossible for me to sit down and do, right? Just sitting here and I know a lot, and just looking at numbers and just kind of spending 10, 15 minutes and just say, okay, this is how I change it. I came up with this list, and I think you guys might hate it. You guys might hate it. I don't know why it keeps doing that. We're going to solve that problem right now. There we go. I've got Oregon at 1, Ohio State at 2. This is where people are going to get really mad, where I've got Georgia at 3, ahead of Texas, Bama at 5, Ole Miss 6, Indiana 7, Penn State 8, Miami 9, Notre Dame 10, 11 Tennessee, 12 Boise State. I think you could flip Miami and Notre Dame. I think that you could argue Tennessee is higher than those two teams. Why did I have Tennessee at number 11? We'll start with number 12, Boise State. I threw Boise State in there partially because of the model of the 12-team playoff and how you have to have the group of 5 champion in there, right? So I threw Boise State in there, even though I think you can argue, hey, this might be a top 12 team, right? Their best loss, since these losses matter, is to Oregon. But let's go through from 1 to 12. Counting my reasoning. Oregon has a great win. Ohio State has looked pretty dominant for a lot of the year. It's undefeated. I just think it's the clear-cut number 1. Ohio State, for the most part, has done the same thing. Like a lot of other schools and like Oregon, they've had blunders. All of these schools have had blunders, okay? So you have to take that into account. Ohio State, though, I mean, we're talking about 1 point on the road. They really screwed that up at the end. Ohio State's really close to being the number 2 team in the country, and Oregon being a couple spots below. Why do I have Georgia at number 3? 1, the strength of schedule is number 1. Number 2, the strength of record, which is how did you do against your strength of schedule? That's ranked number 2. All right, the highest strength of record is Oregon, and that's at number 1. Georgia's got a win over Texas. It's got a win over Tennessee. It's got a win over Clemson, who's only a few spots after this. That's what it's got. And it's also had to deal with road game after road game being significant. Its 2 losses are to these 2 teams who are top 12 teams, right? Why do I have Georgia over Texas? I have it over Texas because of the head-to-head. Georgia went into Texas, into Austin, and beat the Longhorns, and did it while not playing well on offense. That's what I have to say about that. Georgia beat Texas. Texas, similar boat as Penn State to me. What's the difference between Texas being 4 and Penn State being 8? Texas, to me, has looked more dominant in the games outside of its loss. Penn State hasn't. Why is Alabama 5 and Ole Miss 6? They've got the win over Georgia. Okay? They've got a big win over Georgia. It's hard to excuse Ole Miss's blunder over against Kentucky. And with Alabama, it's hard to excuse that against Vanderbilt. So I had a hard time with moving those 2 teams up. But they have a way better win. And it's not Indiana's fault that it's playing these teams. It's not Penn State's fault necessarily that it's playing these teams. But they've done it against better competition. And that's all I got to say. Indiana, undefeated. Looks good doing it outside of 1 or 2 games. It's looked pretty damn good doing it. It's dominated some bad teams. It's 10-0. It's totally deserving of a playoff win unless it just gets waxed by Ohio State. Penn State hasn't looked quite as good, has the loss on its schedule to Ohio State. Miami hasn't looked good the whole year. Like I said, you can argue with me about this stretch. I can totally flip it around and be okay with that. But I do think Miami has some top-end talent. I don't know if it deserves to be this high, but I had a hard time not. I just think Miami would beat Notre Dame in a game, and maybe that's me being a little naive. Tennessee, to me, was definitely the worst out of the SEC teams in this stretch. I just don't think it's looked as good as the other teams outside of its big win over Alabama, and obviously it went and lost on the road to Georgia, like every other team has done this season. And then, like I said, with Boise State, that's my attempt at the rankings. It's not perfect. This exercise was to kind of show you, hey, look, this is really difficult. Everyone's got different biases. Obviously, you saw some of my SEC bias in that. Am I psychotic to have Georgia in my top 3 right now? I don't think so. Is this who are the best teams, or is this how do we rank this in an order of what makes sense? Because to me, it doesn't make sense with how the rankings have looked. And to me, that makes a lot more sense when you're taking into account, hey, strength of schedule. How did these teams look in this game? Does this team have a bad loss? Does this team have a better loss? Excuse me. So we're feeling a little under the weather. I don't know if you could tell I got the sniffles a little bit. But that was my crack at the rankings to show you, hey, look, this is hard. But if you take everything into account, it can't be what they've done. Thanks for watching.